In our last video, we left off by establishing the fact that price elasticity is an examination of how sensitive consumers are to a change in price, and we measure that sensitivity by a change in demand. What we can do is we could use a simple equation to calculate the sensitivity a consumer has to demand. And the equation for price elasticity is simply the percentage change in coin demanded over the percentage change in price. Now, if you know anything about basic mathematics, you know how to calculate a simple percent change. We're going to be using a slightly different formula for a percent change. And this formula sometimes is called the midpoint formula, or sometimes it's called arc elasticity. The reason why we're using this simple formula is if you do a percentage change from 10 to 11, this is a 10% increase. But if you go from 11 to 10, that is not a 10% decrease. That's less than a 10% decrease. So do you see how you get a different percentage depending upon where you start from and where you end? If you start from 10, go to 11, you get a 10% increase. If you start from 11 and go to 10, you get a less than 10% decrease. So to be consistent in terms of a percentage change going from P1 to P2 or from P2 to P1, we're going to use this special formula so we get the same number no matter where we start. And what we're going to do is this formula is going to give us a result, and we call that result E, the elasticity. And the value of E is always going to be negative. That's because of the inverse relationship between price and coin demanded. When price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. When price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. This inverse relationship always gives you a negative value. What we're going to do is we're going to be taking the absolute value of E. So what we're doing is we're going to simply just going to drop the negative sign, that's all. Now, that formula I was telling you about in terms of being consistent going from P1 to P2, from P2 to P1, it's going to look like this. For the percentage change in price, we're going to take the change in price, which is like P1 minus P2, over the average price. And the same thing goes for quantity. We're going to take the simple change in quantity, Q1 minus Q2, over the average quantity. And it's going to look like this. So you see the numerator is right here. The denominator is right here. Oops, let me just erase this. And what we see is I told you that it's the simple change Q1 minus Q2 over average Q divided by P1 minus P2 over average price. And let's do a little simple, test. So I'm going to bring up a calculator. Let me bring up a calculator. Okay, so what we're going to do is, let's say we're currently charging a price of 35 cents. Oops, 35 cents. And and our demand is 6. What if we lower price to 30 cents? Our demand is going to be 8. Well, we could plug these numbers into the formula. Remember, the formula is going to be Q1 minus Q2 over Q1 plus Q2 over 2 divided by P1 minus P2 over P1 plus P2 divided by 2. And we could use our calculator to calculate this out. So our P1, oops, our P, let's try Q1. Q1 is 6, right? So we're going to take 6 minus 8. So Q1 minus Q2, so that's going to be 6. Oops. Let me go back. That's going to be 6 minus 8 over 6 plus 8 divided by 2. And that's going to be divided by 0.35 minus 0.3 over 0.35 plus 0.3 over 2. Let me get rid of that. Why does it do that? I'm not sure why my pen is making these odd marks. This is oh, okay, I'm going to try one more time. But you kind of get the idea what I'm trying to do here. I'm just trying to draw a little line there. Now, this is going to work out to, I'm going to do this over here. Let's go to 6, let's do the numerator first, okay? 6 minus 8 is going to be minus 2 over 6 plus 8 is going to be 14 divided by 2, and that's going to be 7, which divided by 0.35 minus 0.3, that's going to be 0.05. Oh, and the numerator here is going to be 0.35 plus 0.3 divided by 2, and that's going to work out to 0.325. Now, 2 divided by 7 is roughly, I think, 15%. So let's just try that. 2 divided by 7. No, roughly 28%. So 28.6, 0.28.6. So that's going to be 0.286 divided by, and that's going to be 0.05 divided by 0.325, and this is what's going to be roughly 15%. Let's call it 0.154. 0.154. So let's divide it. So it's going to be 0.286 divided by 0.154, and that's going to equal roughly, and by the way, this was a minus, right? A minus. This is a minus sign right there. So that's going to be equal roughly to minus 1.85. And we're going to drop this minus sign because we're going to take the absolute value. I'm just going to drop that minus sign, absolute value. So the value of E equals 1.85. Now what we're going to do is we're going to interpret what that number means. 1.85%. So value of E. So what does that mean? It means that we're going to see is that consumers are relatively sensitive to a change of price. Why is that? Well, when the value of E is greater than 1, that simply means that the change in demand is greater than the change in price. That's like saying this: when price goes up, demand goes down by more than that amount. And the reverse is true. If price goes down, quantity demanded goes up by more. So in each case, do you see how the change in quantity demanded was greater than the change in price? That's sensitive, because remember, we're using demand to measure sensitivity. If there's a big change in demand, that means consumers are sensitive. If there's a small change in demand, that means they're insensitive. And of course that would imply that if values of E greater than 1 make consumers sensitive or elastic, then values of E less than 1 means consumers are inelastic. That's like saying when price goes up, coin demanded goes down just a little bit. Notice how they're moving in opposite directions, but the change in demand is very small. And if price goes down, coin demanded just goes up a teeny bit. In this case, they're insensitive to a change in price. Now, finally, the last one is, what if the value of E is equal to 1? Well, we say that they're unit elastic or kind of neutral. What does that mean? Well, that's like saying when price goes up, coin demanded goes down by the same amount. So one is not bigger than the other. And that's unit elastic. Now, what we're going to see is, let's look at some real products. We see that what are goods that are considered to be, consumers are sensitive to a change in price or elastic. Well, airline travel, in the long run, the value of E is 2.4. What does that mean? Well, that means for every 1% change in price, or airfare, you could expect a 2.4% change in demand. And one of the reasons could be the fact that there are many, many options in terms of who you fly with. And if one firm raises price a little bit, you could expect a big drop in demand because there are other options to consumers. What about restaurant meals? It's 2.3 meaning for every 1% change in price, the demand for restaurant meals changes 2.3%. That could be because restaurant meals are considered to be a luxury. Luxury goods tend to be more price sensitive than goods that are considered to be necessities. What about inelastic? Well, what about cigarettes? The value of E is 0.4, which means for every 1% change in price of cigarettes, demand only changes 0.4%. And that could be because consumers are addicted to the product. So when price goes up, you only see a very small drop in demand because people really, really need it. And one can make the same case for coffee, right? Gasoline, in the short run, when the price of gasoline goes up, demand doesn't drop that much. Only drops, if it goes up by 1%, it drops by 0.2%. That could be because there are very few substitutes. Well, there are no substitutes in terms of putting fuel in your car. But in the long run, I would expect that the value of E to be much higher because there are things you can do to avoid higher gas prices, like maybe like buy a hybrid, move closer to work, take public transportation. But in the short run, meaning if you got to get to work today and you usually drive and the price of gasoline spikes, you're going to pay it. So these are examples of real types of elasticities. And what we're going to do is we're going to be examining some other types of elasticity other than price in our next video.